right, hey y'all. Welcome back to the show. This is part two of a yet to be named episode on Atai Life Sciences recent Nasdaq um, IPO that happened on June 18th. If you want to listen to part one, we talk about just basically the company, the IPO, some of the issues, some of our previous reporting on previous article that we published in 2020 called Christian Angermeyer's Atai Life Sciences is positioned to take the psychedelic throne for MAPS. We just went over that, some of the issues that we raised, how some of that has played out over the last year. So go check that out. We are going to be continuing that conversation about Christian Angermeyer, who is the founder of Atai Life Sciences. He is also a major investor in Compass Pathways. We ended the last episode with a presentation from 2020, I think,
Yep.
beginning of last year, of Rick Doblin on the microdose virtual psychedelics conference. He gave the keynote presentation. One of the slides, he brought up Symposia's article and basically didn't engage with any of our points that we made. Sort of some of like the I don't want to call them predictions, but looking at where the space is as far as donations starting to dry up on the nonprofit side, and sort of how MAPS has paved the way for investors to get into psychedelia, into psychedelics companies, and what's sort of transpired with that. In one of the slides that he brought up, Christian Angermeyer donating to MAPS, saying, "I'm not all about money, I'm about peace too." So we wanted to get in a little bit of some of the other companies and some of the other relationships, some of the other international relationships that Christian Angermeyer has. So before I get into that, anyone got anything else?
No, I'm happy to just jump right into it. I think just to sort of lead off, just to sort of like keep in mind, like I think there are real issues with people in the broader psychedelic community or whatever you want to call it, dismissing people's past patterns of behaviors or activities as irrelevant. And I would contend that like it's actually really important to understand what these folks have done in the past, what they're currently doing, not just to understand sort of like, you know, the type of actions that they engage in the real world, but in order to sort of understand some of their philosophy and the kind of thinking that underscores and guides their approaches. And I got a ton of pushback, including from like Rick Doblin, around looking at some of Peter Thiel's involvement in the space. And yet there are clear dynamics that he has brought into his investments and the tech focus and all of that. And I think I just want to drill that home. Like, this is not superfluous. This is not irrelevant. This is not just like, oh, things that Christian Angermeyer does on the side. These are sort of engagements that I think go to the core of his certain aspects of his philosophy, and that he speaks about, you know, in different arenas on a variety of podcasts and public appearances.
And look, and just like how the say the Web 2.0 companies, the Facebooks, the Googles, how they colonize that open source, open collaboration internet that existed, and we're now where we are, which is a disaster. Like, this is also in sort of similar way what's going on. Like, the nonprofits sort of paved this way. There was this attitude of open science and collaboration, and now you're seeing the for-profit corporations. Look, they're big pharma. That's what this is. These are the startup big pharma disruptors who will probably become, you know, the new crop of big pharma. Maybe some will be acquired by Johnson and whatnot, but
The Google of mental health.
the Google of mental health, exactly. That's sort of kind of how I see some of this. Before we get into anything, I forgot to do introductions. So we are joined by David Nichols, managing editor.
Yo, yo. Hey,
We are
hey.
joined by our newest team member, Sarvesh Ramprakash.
Hey, hey.
And we are also joined by Symposia senior writer Russell Hosfeld.
Hey, hey.
All right. So one of the things that has stood out for, I think, since we started following Angermeyer early on, at least since early last year or so, is that Christian Angermeyer is on the advisory council to Rwanda's president Paul Kagame. Um, when we saw this, we started diving in. What's going on here? Who is Kagame? I honestly had, like most people, I have no idea what's going on in Rwanda. I'm aware of the genocide that had happened there in the 90s, but I didn't really know too much about that. So he's an advisor to Kagame. Kagame has been implicated in a wide range of political murders, disappearances, executions, running a surveillance police state, war crimes, all kinds of fucked up shit.
Yeah.
And before I kind of get into that, recently a book came out called "Do Not Disturb" by a journalist, Michela Wrong, and the focus isn't just on Kagame's numerous political murders, kidnappings, arrests of political opponents, critics, activists, journalists, all that. It's focused on the 2013 murder of Patrick Karegeya, who was Kagame's former intelligence chief. He was part of the Rwanda Patriotic Front, the RFP, they're the ruling party right now. The fact that this guy became a critic of Kagame. He knew everything about the party. He was an intelligence chief, had all the connections. He was assassinated in a hotel room on New Year's Eve 2013. They drugged him. They get what they do. They got a guy close to him, got him in the hotel room. They drugged him and then they garroted him. They had like a wire or something, basically cut his neck open. His family, they know it was Kagame, and actually, when you read the book, there's all sorts of like audio conversations that were recorded. The Kagame regime is so unbelievably sloppy that it's really easy for journalists and different people to kind of put the pieces together. After the murder that happened of Karegeya, Kagame's reaction was, you can't betray Rwanda and not get punished. Anyone, even though still alive, will reap the consequences. Anyone, it's a matter of time. And when confronted, Kagame denied responsibility, but he said that actually, I wish Rwanda did it. I really wish it. And also, the defense minister of Rwanda made an awful public statement that says, "When you choose to be like a dog, you die like a dog." And the cleaners will wipe away the trash so that it doesn't stink for them.
Jesus.
Yeah, so like when you start digging into Kagame, you're gonna start finding, one of the things that you'll see is a lot of Human Rights Watch articles.
So much.
Yeah, Human Rights Watch has been following this for quite some time. Also, just to ground this in some context here, this is the person that the founder of Atai is on the advisory council in Rwanda with. And we've received pushback from bringing this up as well, where, we're being whatever.
Well, hey, I'm allied with a warlord, a ruthless warlord.
Yeah,
don't
and
bring that up, please. It's bad for business.
It's not even that. It's not even don't bring it up. It's like on his bio for
get into that.
certain conferences and stuff.
Yeah, there's some recent, just a few recent, throw it in Google News, Kagame and Google News. Guardian came out with an article, I think like a month ago, called "The World is Slowly Waking Up to Paul Kagame's Brutal Actions in Rwanda." Human Rights Watch came out with an article, I think just a few days ago, called Justice is Unfinished Business in Rwanda, pointing out to another thing that recently happened. This article points out to the illegal kidnapping. They abducted Paul Rusesabagina, who is the guy who saved a lot of Rwandans and he's the subject of Hotel Rwanda, and he saved a lot of people in the hotel. He became a big figure, big international figure. I think Bush gave him possibly the Medal of Freedom, and he became really popular internationally. But then he also became a critic of Kagame. Kagame has now been the president. He's doing actually what the I think you pronounce his name Museveni. He's the president of Uganda. He's been in there since the 1980s, and Kagame now I think has legal authority to be the president until at least 2030. So he's been the president right now for about 20 some years. He's been the man in charge because he ran the invasion force of in the RFP when they were fighting the regime at the time.
And I know,
yeah.
just to jump in real quick, like I know Normie's been sort of hammering the Human Rights Watch stuff, and like it's also been like a really brutal class war where like he has, quote, cleaned up the streets by like going after street vendors and sex workers and, you know, the so-called like undesirable classes, and just like locking them up in order to clean up what is it, Kigali, right? The capital, and make it look, you know, supposedly like attractive or hospitable to like tourists, foreign dignitaries, whomever.
So after the 100 days of genocide that happened, the UN, the West, like completely ignored all of that was going on. They did shit. I actually forget how many people were killed. It was something like 800,000 people were killed in 100 days, and hacked to shit. And the West did nothing. And Kagame and the RFP spun us. They were also involved in war crimes. They were also the Tutsis were also being massacred, but they were also involved in war crimes as well. Which the story that they spun over the last couple decades in the early years was they spun that they were the saviors, they were the good guys, and through his authoritarian regime, he's established a reputation that Rwanda is a great place for Western investment, and so it has become that.
And Angermeyer.
Angermeyer's one of the people who got in there a while ago. That story has started to be questioned now. CNN just came out with an article not that long ago called America's Disastrous Love Affair with Rwanda's Paul Kagame. I believe that there was a recent African climate summit that the Biden administration either organized or something like that they didn't even invite Kagame to.
There's something very... I was going to say there's something very neo-colonialist about
absolutely
these rich Silicon Valley investors. I mean, we already are aware of the way China, for example, is making plays, in Africa, whether transportation, whether controlling shipping ports or whatever. And now we have the next crop of people seeking opportunity or influence operations. We were talking in part one about how ludicrous it was to dose people with ayahuasca, Israelis and Palestinians, and expect them to understand the base realities of what that conflict was, the actual geopolitical conflict. Simply understanding each other for a night doesn't change that. And
even if it gave them full understanding of all of the geopolitics,
Right.
around that, like there are structures of power, like, and this goes back to something else that Doblin and some of these folks seem to miss, that like countries don't go to war because, politicians, mommies and daddies didn't love them enough, like
Right.
there's like material realities that undergird that. And whether it's Angermeyer talking about, Paul Kagame as the real Black Panther, or all of this sort of, when you talk
Can you
about...
point that out? Like, don't just like throw
hang
that
on,
out
hang
there.
on. Well, okay, so I just want to be clear. I distracted us from the finishing of the Rusesa Begina story, and it feels it's important to note that like Kagame's secret intelligence basically tricked him into getting onto the wrong flight, onto a private jet that he thought he was flying to like Belgium or something, and instead they flew him to Rwanda and incarcerated him, and he's now he's still there.
So he's actually recently they've charged him with like terrorism charges, and recently the prosecutors are seeking a life sentence on him. That's
Wow.
the current updates now.
So meanwhile, was it that it was Angermeyer wrote like a Medium article where
He wrote a Medium article called "The Real Life Black Panther Miracle" that was published on Medium on March 25th, 2018. We will link that in the show notes. Should we link that in the show notes?
Yeah.
might
it's
as
worth
well.
reading.
People should. But yeah, the thing that brought it up was Sarvesh's point about the sort of the way like this information is getting framed, right? Like the way that you have these information narratives designed to sort of make things look a certain way, to present this sort of appealing cover story, and like, ultimately to facilitate what sort of like business and capital engagements that are favorable to folks like Angermeyer and the other fraction of the top 1%.
And this is one of the reasons that Kagame, that they've removed the undesirables, street homeless people, sex workers, whatever. They've removed them. They've cleaned them out. They've relocated them throughout the country to create that, obviously, that appearance that everything is great, even though they're running a police state, even though that people can't talk about stuff in Rwanda. People can't talk about stuff. There's Rwandan dissidents all over the world. There's a story that she writes about in the book about how Rwandan intelligence was monitoring people. I believe in France. No, it was in England. They keep tabs on everybody. People are very scared to talk openly about what's going on there. It is a police state.
I mean, using techniques adopted from the Mossad, if memory serves.
Well,
Wow.
that was the assassination techniques,
Yeah.
and drugging and how they did all that. I wanted to read one section here that is in Michela Wrong's book, Do Not Disturb. It's a section on Kagame's bloodlust when he was a commander of the RFP during the war. She writes that when a disobedient guerrilla came up for court-martial, it was often Kagame's job to make the case for the prosecution, revealing what he had discovered during the course of investigations to a disciplinary committee. Kagame requested the death sentence with such alacrity that he acquired the nickname that dogs him to this day, Pilato, they called him, in tribute to Pontius Pilate, the man who ordered Jesus' crucifixion while washing his hands of moral responsibility. Contemporaries marveled at the triviality of the infractions deemed to merit capital punishment. Internal rivalry, indiscipline, fighting, sneaking off to get a beer, making noise, or dropping something when we were moving, leaving your comrades during an ambush. Those were all reasons. He wouldn't hesitate to send them to their graves. Did Kagame personally administer the death penalty? No. But I was at meetings where he would read out the names of those who were to die, and then he'd send the parties on missions to their units to carry out the sentence. My next question was instinctive. I blurted it out. Did Kagame enjoy it? Very much so. He sucked in his breath. he enjoyed it too much. So, like,
So this is the guy that Angermeyer is discussing in his, being on the presidential
he's about
advisory
peace.
council.
He's about
And
peace.
probably benefiting. Angermeyer's the senior advisor for like the African Development Corporation as well, and things like that. So he's clearly interested.
So
in
thank you,
bringing
Rick
investments
Doblin, for
into-
putting a slide that promotes Christian Angermeyer not just being about money, but about peace. So,
Yeah, and it's not just Doblin. It's
we didn't point that out. We get a nice little section that I think I skimmed past here. I wanted to give out a shout out to the folks at Scitec Global. They hosted a panel with Angermeyer, Mark Bronstein, and Rosalind Watts last year. And on their website, they had Angermeyer's his bio, which read, the section of it read, in addition to his entrepreneurial activities, Christian places great value on social, political, and societal commitments. He is a young global leader of the World Economic Forum, a member of the Presidential Advisory Council of His Excellency President Paul Kagame of Rwanda, and a member of the Milken Institute Young Leaders Circle. And before that, it was on Zoom or some platform. And before that started, Dave was in there, and this is actually what Dave said. He said, "Are y'all aware that Christian Angermeyer works for murderous dictator Paul Kagame on his advisory council? He even advertises it on his Scitec bio. How do you think that squares with Atai's stated goal of ending the mental health crisis? What about his repeated calls to end social distancing as early as March 25th, and his vocal advocacy for chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine? How does that square with the mental health needs of millions of folks?" And in response to that, the Scitec Global folks banned Dave from the chat.
Way to address
from
the
the whole
issue.
thing. Yeah.
But just remember, Angermeyer's not just about money; he's about peace too.
I wanted to take the time to illustrate by example, to paint a picture, if you will, of kind of what necessarily an Angermeyer type investment in Africa could take shape. And I'm going to do it by examining something that happened in my recent past. So I'm Indian, and whenever I visit India, my family usually takes a flight to Chennai or Madras, and then my father's side of the family is in a smaller city called Madurai. And we take a small turboprop airplane that flies pretty low and is very rattly, and then land at the international airport there. One of these journeys, I was in a flight, and the guy next to me seemed like an American. He must have immediately clued on that maybe hairstyle, something. He was like, this guy's clearly not from the mainland. Let me talk to him in English and just like strike up a conversation. And I ended up talking to him, and what I found out that he is a pharmaceutical executive or someone highly placed in a pharmaceutical company whose job it is to find patients for clinical trials in war-torn and or marginalized environments like India. Some of these people do not have the reading capacity to even sign the disclaimers. They don't read, so they can just sign with an X. But, why test on Americans when the adverse effects can be managed by other undesirables that are in other countries? And I just want to bring that back to now, Rick Doblin and Angermeyer talking about, psychedelic reconciliation, being able to solve geopolitical issues with psychedelics, or being able to test psychedelics. Testing requires time. Testing requires money. Testing requires logistics. Are you going to subject a bunch of Berkeley kids to, taking MDMA or whatever, or are you going to outsource it, because it's one of the largest components of your investment portfolio, and something like that scares the shit out of me, frankly, because once again, talking about neo-colonialist like extraction of resources and even mental health from other regions, there's an easy path and a dotted line to be made between trying all these treatments out for the American market and then seeing what they can do in more war-torn and more geopolitically complex situations.
Well, the plan is for MAP strategy right now in Europe is to be giving MDMA to refugees and marginalized populations who have been affected. That's my understanding now.
Unreal. And actually, just as a side note too, if you want to explore more of that kind of not psychedelic but pharmaceutical research and the ugliness that happens in Africa and other countries, read John le Carre's The Constant Gardener or watch the movie starring Ray
Movie's
Liotta.
fantastic with Ray Fiennes. I haven't watched it in a while. It's a fantastic movie.
And it's a heater. It's brutal, but it's a heater. But sorry, go ahead.
It's no.
Who else just offshored their clinical trials? Didn't some other psychedelic company?
Cybin,
Jamaica?
well, Cybin is doing psilocybin in Jamaica, which is funny because,
Gotcha.
like, there's just, this goes back to like some of both Elucis, Benefit Corp, and Compass's early days, where they were looking at doing trials in the Isle of Man. The issue that comes up, like, part of the reason you want to do clinical trials in like the U.S. or the UK or sort of these regulatory or areas where the regulatory apparatus is considered to be quite strong or sort of like at the top of the international standards, is that you want those trials to generalize. You want the data you create to be relevant worldwide so that you can have the biggest impact possible. If you get approval somewhere like Jamaica or the Isle of Man, the notion that the US is going to look at that data and say, cool, we're down with it, you run a much lower likelihood of anything you find being relevant. Now, if you're looking to do press releases about, we did yada, yada, yada clinical trial and put that out in the hopes of raising additional investor money. I mean, we've seen this with cannabis. We've seen precisely those sorts of like fluff approaches. But yeah, I mean,
We've seen this with MindMed. Pull out the next psychedelic project out of a hat,
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, and again, like the reason that we're seeing all of this commotion is precisely because the material realities of the world in which we live, like we have skyrocketing rates of depression and trauma, and whether it's as a result of despair around climate catastrophe or people who are living with the realities of U.S. militarism, or we can run through a laundry list of the underlying systemic causes. But one of the things that stood out was a statement that Angermeyer made that we are building a world that's harmful for our minds. And he said this in a recent Sifted article that has a bunch of absolutely bonkers quotes from him.
This was the same one where he called himself the anti-Timothy Leary, right?
Yeah. And I just want to point out that like this notion that we're building a world harmful for our minds, like Angermeyer is an architect. Like he's a major proponent of capitalism. We have the whole rundown of Kagame. Yeah, go ahead.
And who's we are? Who's that?
Right.
I'm not.
Who is this we?
I'm not building that world. Like people with money and power are building that world where everybody else is living in, trying to survive and adapt in, and take fucking psychedelics in to heal their mind from that world that those elites are actually building.
It's almost like the money and power are inherently causing the harm to the mind, but that would take a slightly more empathetic and less narcissistic mind to sift that one out.
Well. Yeah, and when you looking at his social media comments throughout the pandemic, whether it was everything from emphatically pushing hydroxychloroquine and AZT as a treatment that everybody should be taking, and refusing to acknowledge it, even when data and information came out showing that it actually increased the likelihood of mortality. His comments about how, I think he put one of those infographics that showed COVID next to like the Black Death and a bunch of other significant catastrophes, as if to suggest that it really wasn't that big a deal. I mean, the belly aching about freedom. The sort of claims that he's made throughout this, I think, indicate to me like a lack of empathy and a lack of consideration. And the fact that this guy is at the helm of a biotech company that was claiming to be looking to ultimately cure, mental health issues, and is now stating that we're building a world harmful for our mind. That's like, that's certainly what I see when I look at the world he's building, when I look at what he's invested in. And we haven't even touched on crypto.
I also wanted to point out that after we published, we did like a little Instagram thing, and then we published 2 articles. One of them was was called Flat. This is a quote from Angermeyer. Flattening the curve is complete bullshit. Pandemic advice from psychedelic investor Christian Angermayer, and we ran another piece called Amidst Pandemic, Psychedelic Investor Christian Angermayer Can't Imagine Life Beyond Capitalism. One of the things that we pointed out in Amidst Pandemic article, I believe, we pointed out in the other article, was that he called for a social he called for an end for social distancing. Basically, so there was like the amount of cases and deaths, they ended up doing just like a tremendous vertical J curve. They just went through the roof. He called for an end for social distancing like in April or May, an Easter,
March 25th.
It was like a Trump Easter thing. You know, he said Trump was right. We need to end social distancing really early, and you know, the curve ended up going straight up. He wanted it to be like right here. I forget how many deaths at the time that there was in the United States. There was about, So so at the time, his 1 week proposed time for ending it, there had been 20,000 deaths in the United States, and the 2 week time there had been 50,000. We're at over 600,000 now, and obviously last year that went crazy. But he was on that. It's Easter, like, we got to end this. It's going to destroy everything. It's going to destroy the economy. It was all about economy.
Yeah, I mean, and he was also promoting all sorts of absurd things like, what was it, like cruise lines offering like
$1 million prize to get a
vaccines, and you know, I mean,
he was promoting hydroxychloroquine with azithromycin, which I believe it was the university. He was promoting it heavily, and he was writing articles on it. And this is the head of a biotech company, by the way. And I think the University of Minnesota, if I recall, they came out with an article saying that combined hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin treatment actually led to increased mortality in patients.
You know what's funny though? Like that cruise line thing stuck to me because I just realized that there was an article in Bloomberg December 30th of last year that I read titled "The Cruise Ship Suicides Began After the Last Passengers Left." So
yeah, I actually read that too.
Imagine putting, you know, a financial incentive to get a vaccine on a cruise line where people are already living in isolated quarters, already overworked, with no clear ability to actually like get back to land and see their family or anything like that. It really is flabbergasting to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. It's like I feel like when you look into the various projects that he's involved in, I mean, you know, there's his whole crypto engagement. I mean, aside from the fact that the projects have largely flopped, you know, as Normie pointed out earlier, and he's got this Northern Data crypto mining facility, there's all of the questions of like the ecological impact of this technology. Never mind like just the running the mines, but like all of the resources that go into them, into the hardware, into building it, all of that. And then you've got like straight up, he's an investor in Rock Tech Lithium. He's invested in Cyber, the company we talked about, the sort of Neuralink competitor. And again, like looking at technology like Cyber, particularly in combination with psychedelics, we're talking about psychedelic surveillance capitalism. We're talking about giving people like Angermeyer and the companies they run access into some of our deepest, most data-rich, granular, like the ability to build out meaningful profiles based on the data that could come with that sort of technology is quite disturbing. And it seems dystopian, like imagining a helmet that could monitor, you know, sort of, or tie together all of these so-called biomarkers to build an avatar modeled on whatever it's able to extract seems terrifying on its own. And that's like if it goes right. If it goes wrong, I mean, earlier, Sarvesh, you brought up the potential for hacks and the exposure there. But also, if we look at things like facial recognition algorithms in people of color, if we look at what happens, or the large language sets, like
use for
Google,
GPT-3, I guess.
Yeah. And like the issues of if you don't have accurate representation, if you build a model of the world that does not actually represent the world, but you treat it as though it does, or if I build a model of a person that doesn't represent the person, but I treat it as though it does, you know, the potential to be so confident about what that presents and then to make all sorts of misrecommendations or other problematic engagements as a result of that bad modeling. I mean, the potential if it goes right is terrifying. The potential if it goes wrong is terrifying. And the notion that this should be in the hands of somebody like Angermeyer
or Peter Thiel.
Yeah, exactly.
What? Well, look, the frontier of biometrics is still like the accumulation of biometric data matched against all kinds of other data sets. You know, we're still going there. Facebook I don't know if you guys caught this. Facebook just announced their first product, which is a watch. They want to compete with the Apple Watch. So that, you know, like this is where they want to tap in on these things.
But
well, there was if I may, there was one thing that like stuck out to me with like this biometrics trend, and then now this trend of Neuralink and all of its competing companies about reading the brain, right? One of my biggest privacy concerns when it came to the 23andMe's and Ancestry.com's genetic screening is the potential that my data is sold to law enforcement and that I'm narking on all of my descendants via biomarker, which has happened more than once. You know, they find someone and they find like a relative in Ancestry.com or whatever. There is a good chance, there is a good heritability of mental health conditions between parents and their children and distant relatives and whatnot. I shudder to think of the possibilities that can happen when you can behaviorally profile someone before they ever walk into the door. I mean, we're getting into like even more so than Gattaca territory. At least Gattaca was talking about genetic profiling. Now we have mental profiling where, you know, your traumas can be matched up with people who have similar trauma profiles to coach you on how you're supposed to answer in the interview questions or to deny you coverage for health insurance.
Well, and your point about 23andMe is really well taken and in an entirely different arena as well, which is like, you don't necessarily get the option to opt in or opt out of this tech. Like, even if you never did a 23andMe type, test, there has been such extensive testing that like, it's like, contrary to libertarians like Angermeyer and their view of the world, we don't exist as individuals. We exist as collectives. We exist as societies. We exist as communities in one form or another. And so like the choices that we make, the decisions we make have effects on each other. And so when enough people opt into technology like that, it has real world consequences for people who've never even considered opting in or agreeing to that.
And I think also someone acquire 23andMe?
Blackrock or
really
the yeah, I'm pretty sure, or it was either, and I think it was Ancestry.com.
They bought Ancestry.com for $4.7 billion.
Jeez.
Yeah. You know, and BlackRock is like one of the most insidious
Blackstone
Blackstone. Yeah, one of the most disturbing sort of VC type firms.
Branson just acquired 23andMe. Virgin.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Wow,
oh, joy.
It's really vertically integrating and centralizing now. Damn, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So just to pivot for a moment, you know, one of the sort of running themes through some of Angermeyer's work, shall we call it, has been his sloppiness. Like, you know, with regards to the hydroxychloroquine azithromycin tweets, you know, he was so confident. He actually invited Symposia to a debate, told us how well his tweets would age, and has refused to engage with any inquiries.
We have accepted that twice.
Yeah, and have followed up with him as well about his interest and have yet to hear back. Now, I just want to point out in this recent Sifted article, which we'll also throw in the episode notes, when Angermeyer was asked, how do you see the competitive landscape evolving around psychedelics, part of his reply was that, quote, Atai owns the IP around all relevant psychedelics, which from our point of view makes sense commercially within the medical world. Now, a researcher friend of ours pointed out the problem with that statement, highlighting the fact that it seems to me like the founder of a publicly traded company shouldn't be making materially false statements. And so, like, the way that these people, now that Atai is a public company, there are issues around how it's discussed. There are issues around, misleading investors. There are questions around, let's say, accuracy and truth in advertising. And for Angermeyer to be claiming that Atai owns the IP around all relevant psychedelics, I mean, that's just not true.
Mm-hmm. In his mind, they probably have all the relevant IP. But
sure, and maybe that's what he would argue if you got his back up against the wall.
Sure.
But why is he so confident? I mean, Lars Wild was telling people the other month about how Compass wasn't really going to interfere all that much through their patents were.
Let's get into this a little bit. Let's set the landscape here.
Yeah.
A little bit. So Shayla Love, her reporting in Vice, it was the second piece that she had wrote on some of the Compass patent grabs. There was a leaked email, a March 8th email sent to investors and some other folks in psychedelics. He basically is saying, have I told you, this is the screenshot of the leak email. It's titled Compass NASDAQ. He says, have I told you I believe in the potential of magic mushrooms? Compass.
Just jump down to the differentiation.
He said, I also expect a starting differentiation between solid players in the psychedelic space, to be honest. I really just see Atai and Compass and copycats. Most of the copycats miss one important thing: patents. Many psychedelic companies out there will never be able to bring a product to market as they will hit patents of Compass and Atai. Now, this is something we've been saying for a while. We followed up on some of that Vice reporting. Russell followed up on some of that Vice reporting. And basically, we were looking at that it's much more. The Vice reporting was focused on Compass's overly broad patent claims as far as the furniture and the music and some of like the set and setting. Actually, when you read through the PCT applications that Compass made, it's a way that they're basically trying to get the whole DSM for psilocybin, not even for Comp 360, which is their proprietary compound. It was for psilocybin.
Yeah, and then they back it all up with,
and active metabolites. The sort of fallback position was Comp 360, which is their proprietary. So they're going after psilocybin first. That doesn't work out for all these things. They're throwing spaghetti at the wall.
The claims and the applications are set up are all of this for psilocybin, and then a couple of claims that say, and all of those claims for Comp 360 too.
Correct.
Yeah, and it's worth pointing out that like they publicly say, no, we're not coming after your mushrooms, we're not coming after psilocybin. This is just for our proprietary formulation, which, is the notion that is a proprietary formulation is questionable in the first place. But even putting that aside, the application, it literally is for psilocybin or the metabolite, right? And so there's question about that being so far-reaching because the active metabolite of psilocybin is psilocin. And so there's questions about like how a patent office would interpret that. So if you develop another novel compound that is a psilocin prodrug, right, something that your body will metabolize into psilocin, and Compass gets that approval for their psilocybin or active metabolite thereof, suddenly your supposedly proprietary compound that turns into psilocin in the body is now covered by Compass's patent.
It's literally the same thing as like an Adderall Vyvanse comparison when you're talking about the prodrugs, at least, I'm sorry, Adderall Vyvanse. Yeah, that's what I said. In Vyvanse's case, it's to reduce abuse potential, but here it's like a patent dodge to lay claim on something.
Or make it bigger, like he says in the email, so people run into it when they go find something.
So one of the things that
you scare off investors, right? It's like they don't even necessarily need, if you've got investors who are hip to the patents that already exist, and admittedly this patent hasn't been approved yet, but knowing that Compass is flexing for that, you have to wonder where investors are going to be inclined to throw their dollars. Sorry.
Sure.
Norman.
And we pointed out that one of the strategy, their patent strategy, was basically a scorched earth policy. And in a recent event that happened, which our last live stream that we covered this, we broke this down. It was hosted by the Oxford Psychedelic Society, and they did an event that was supposed to be about psychedelic capitalism. It was supposed to be a debate on psychedelic capitalism. It wasn't. It was two entrepreneurs who agreed on a lot of things. But Lars Wild, Lars is the president and chief business officer of Compass Pathways, and he's also a co-founder of Atai. Alexander Boehner, he asked Lars about the leaked emails, Angermeyer's leaked emails, and Lars Wild's response was, "I don't know what he means by that. He's simply an investor, and we're a public company. He has zero insight into our patent strategy and any of the inner workings of the company. I'm obviously aware of that email, which seems very promotional to me. But yeah, he's not the spokesperson of the company. It's really not our opinion represented there." Now, again, Lars is talking about a good friend of his. He's talking about his co-founding partner in Atai, and also he's not simply an investor. He's someone who owns a quarter of Compass. So to just like kind of distance them, he's just distancing themselves from that there. But again, this is their patent strategy. This is what they've been doing. These are two instances of Angermeyer in the Sifted article saying, like, how do you see the competitive landscape evolving? Well, it's not gonna. We own everything, so it's not gonna. And and in the leaked emails, he's saying the same thing. Everybody's gonna hit the wall of Compass patents. Like, this is the plan. This is the plan. That's why they just raised $1 billion combined about, because investors know this.
Well, do you want to talk, or do we want to get into about the availability and what he was telling Bartlett in this podcast interview? One of you guys can take it away. I mean, what's the quote?
Sure, Dave. Why don't you get into that juicy interview?
What was it called? It was like Happy Sexy Millionaire guy.
He's the Happy Sexy Millionaire author.
So Stephen Bartlett did an interview with Angermeyer called "A Billionaire's Guide to Healing Your Mind and Extending Your Life." And there's a bunch of just kind of mind-boggling quotes in that interview. It struck me. So I recently listened to an interview with Sam Altman and Ezra Klein as well. Sam Altman is the money behind Journey Collab, which is a corporadelic firm that's getting into mescaline and some other things. But Altman is also involved in OpenAI, another Silicon Valley tech bro. And the thing between both Angermeyer and Altman, listening to their political statements that they make publicly, is like they range from like inconsistent to incoherent. And yet when pressed about it, it's like they don't, it's like they've got enough money that they don't have to worry about that consistency, because at the end of the day, like, they have the real world capital and power to sort of do the things that they want to do. And so for me, like, it was kind of hilarious to hear Angermeyer, who repeatedly identifies himself as a libertarian. He tells Bartlett in this interview, like at 3 different points. At one point he says, "I don't think the government should be responsible to think for myself." Another point he says, "I'm already pissed about the government interfering in my stuff in any way." And then later he says, "In general, I think the less government, the better." And yet in the context of the Sifted article that we brought up earlier, he seems to talk quite a bit about the importance of government intervention and regulation with regards to psychedelic compounds, at one point saying, we don't treat these compounds lightly. Such powerful substances must, of course, be taken under strict medical or psychological supervision, but then they have indeed curative potential. Atai is working on making certain psychedelics legal again as drugs to be taken under medical supervision. We do not advocate that psychedelics should be freely available. They are too powerful for that, and people could misuse them. Now, as we've pointed out repeatedly on this show, there's no evidentiary basis for prohibition. It's a purely political stance. And so here, Angermeyer is appealing to the power of the state to maintain criminalization in all but medical contexts. And he's doing so despite the fact that his experience with psychedelics are explicitly outside of a medical context. And so this notion, like his sense of libertarianism seems to extend about as far as himself or his rich buddies, the notion that he should be free to do whatever he wants, but everybody else should be subservient and subjected to state power. That's, again, like it just doesn't hold. It's not a coherent or consistent political position.
It just falls apart right there when he says we do not advocate the psychedelics be freely available. Like, I thought you were a libertarian, man.
Exactly. And when it comes to people misusing them, Christian, you're misusing psychedelics right now as an IP play. Like your own statement does not align with what you've been doing. It's just hypocrisy at the highest level.
Well, and I think he falls back on in most interviews that like the modern day therapists are the modern day shamans, and you shouldn't be taking psychedelics without a professional in the room like that. Which. Never mind. I was going to get an empath bio there because he's trying to make no therapy MDMA, but he was on a yacht, and in the same Sifted interview, he talks about the two people he was with who he jokingly refers to as his shamans, and it was an LA-based artist and an actor from, I think, London or something, who he took the mushrooms with, so it's just...
Right, he says they're like
everywhere.
Around.
His two best friends or whatever, and they're investors in Compass or something. And when you look at that, again, like these people want the freedom to do whatever they want to do, but everybody else should be subjected to the rules or the, in this case, I think if Brian Pace were here, he would point out that if you're going to have an endeavor like this, you need to have some sort of exclusivity. You need to be able to wall off the commons. And so medicalization is prohibition light. Like Compass and similar corporadelic firms rely on having that legal distinction around therapeutic interventions in order to be the providers and the purveyors of these compounds.
Hear, hear.
So, we can also talk about, his, Angermeyer has the Aperon Investments, which is his personal, company. They were running for a while on the front page. I'm not sure if it's still there, but like in all caps, it said, "Tech will save the world, not kill it."
It's still there.
And yet, yeah, it's just like trying to pick apart like what he means by that when the way that he discusses the political reality, like the techno politics, the psychopolitics, like all of the various different arenas surrounding these technologies and his understandings of them and his applications of them, by and large, they seem to be very poorly thought out. Like they seem to function largely as ads or maybe optimistic sounding propaganda.
It's thought leader memes. It's like
but the fact that he's got enough social, political, whatever capital that he's able to advance these as though they're serious positions, and then basically entrench himself and argue without any sort of there's no stakes for him in a sense. Like we're the people who ultimately end up bearing the consequences.
When you have that amount of money and power, you can just develop your little following, and a lot of people just want to follow you.
Sure.
You
and that's
look at Elon
scary
Musk.
about his. Oh, sorry. Go on.
No.
Well, that's what kind of scares me about his misstatements and his like sloppiness is that people do take him seriously, and especially in people take psychedelics really seriously, and he's kind of become the face of business psychedelics for a lot of people. So I don't know, it like needs to rein in the sloppiness.
No, to your point, he is the largest existing investor, right? As far as we know, or is that Teal? It's between like Angermeyer and Teal.
I think it's
no?
Angermeyer.
I think Angermeyer's got the most psychedelic investment, but
so if we're looking at basically not only is the largest psychedelic investor like going around and making these statements, but then like as a founder of Atai, right, we've got him making materially false statements about his own company. And if we look at his history and his origin story, we see a history of, let's say, distortions of the truth, if not outright lies.
Here's
go ahead.
Here's the truth, and that people are going to look back in the future and look back at some psychedelic history. The largest investor during the so-called psychedelic renaissance, the most powerful man, during the psychedelic renaissance, is in bed with a dictator who's currently murdering critics.
Yeah.
Like, guys, that's the story. Like, in a little bit. You're going to look back at
the story
that
right
say,
now.
I know.
You're just not acknowledging it.
No one wants to acknowledge it because they say that it's like it creates a storm of cognitive dissonance, and that you want to eliminate that. You don't want to look at who the fucking people are who you just opened the door and they walked right in and they gave you a little bit of money and you said, okay, cool. Even though they're working with dictators who are murdering their population right now. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And that's why we keep hammering these points. Like, Angermeyer is doing this. Peter Thiel is using software to round up refugees who are fleeing horrific conditions of Latin America. That's happening now. And who are all these people in psychedelics? It's like, I think if you did a poll, a lot of people interested in psychedelics would be like, fuck Big Pharma. Fuck them.
Yeah.
We hate them. But when it's their guys in Big Pharma with psychedelics, with the shit that they like, fuck yeah. Come on. Bring it on. Mainstream this shit, baby.
Well, my question, too, is what happens if MAPS gets wiped off the terrain? Or what happens if MAPS winds up, needing to do an IPO or putting itself in a...
What happens if they become irrelevant because Johnson & Johnson and everybody
else... That's what I mean.
They're just a little... right now, they're just a little boutique firm. They got a sweet deal with the FDA right now. But in terms of capitalization, MAPS is a boutique firm.
So, but that's exactly my point. And like, what happens to the psychedelic advocates, the ones who are maybe skeptical of MindMed or Atai or, any of these other companies, like, at what point is there realization that MAPS opened the front door, rolled out the red carpet, like all of the market capitalization that we've seen took place after MAPS brought in Compass and gave them access to everything. I mean, this is, again, like, we can
this
trace
is why we wrote the article that this that we're talking about this over a year later. We're doing this update because we wrote an article in March of 2020 called Christian Angermeyer's Atai Life Sciences is positioned to take the psychedelic throne for MAPS. They have right now. And I think they're going to continue more. And Angermeyer is confident / arrogant enough where he can leave these breadcrumbs saying, no one's coming next to us because they're going to hit our wall. That's where it is. And I just want to point this out is that I don't think anybody knows this, and I didn't know this until recently, but Ben Sessa and David Nutt, who are with, and it's not just like the big boys, it is also the other smaller firms that are out there. One of them is Awaken. It's Ben Sessa is with Awaken with a handful of other people. And Rick somewhat recently announced that he got pissed with them and he's going, apparently, if anybody has more information, please reach out to us. But apparently that MAPS is going to be challenging. MAPS basically gave all kinds of data and everything to Awaken and to Ben to do the MDMA for alcoholism study, my understanding. And Awaken turned around and attempted to patent MDMA for alcoholism. And Rick recently commented on that.
I just want to point out that back in 2018, when I gave MAPS grief for the way that they were facilitating Compass and collaborating with Compass, you know, Rick informed me that his read of open science was that you just share with everyone. You just share, you're just an open book, and anyone who wants anything, you just give it to them. And I said, no, my understanding of open science is that it's important to work to maintain the material conditions that allow for open science. So you actually don't share with a venture-backed firm because they're going to be incentivized to use anything you share against you to, again, sequester the commons and use that to their own benefit. Now, it sounds, whether or not Rick is willing to acknowledge it, it sounds like he's changing his tune or realizing that his read or his former conceptualization of open science actually puts MAPS at a significant disadvantage against these sort of for-profit, non-cooperative players.
Yeah, this space is cutthroat. It's competition. It's kill or be killed. Like, that's what capitalism and big pharma is. Why are we surprised that we've been saying this for several years now? I changed my tune entirely in this space when Compass came onto the scene. It was the spring of 2018. As soon as I saw that, I completely changed my tune on this. And when we started working together, Dave, we started seeing all these bricks being laid, and it was very apparent. So to see
again,
where it, and guess what? we are still only. I was on the phone with you the other day, Dave, and you painted a good picture in my mind. It's like the gates have opened. The jockeys are on the horses. The gun is fired, and they've just come out of the gates right now. Yeah. And there's not even any like shenanigans really happening yet. They're not at the finish line yet. They're staying in their own lanes. The shit hasn't happened yet. They haven't started kicking the horses yet. They haven't started doping the horses yet. Like right. they haven't been engaged in that yet. We're not. I don't think that we're really there. What we're seeing is people are just trying to grab whatever IP is around, come up with cockamamie compounds, deuterate this, deuterate that. Like, grab what you can right now. You know, you might get something, get acquired or whatever. We're gonna see most of the companies go away. Most of the companies that are out there won't be around in a couple years. I think, Dave, you pointed out something. Who knows if this is true, but J.R. Ron gone at MindMed, is that like kind of one of the first bubbles? We're going to start seeing the foundation shake a little bit in the space as the weak companies kind of are shaken out over the next handful, probably 12 months, something like that. I don't really know.
Yeah, I don't know as far as time, but I certainly think in the near future we're going to see rounds of acquisitions and just abject failures. You know, companies like Minor Co. just like, you know,
right.
Truly busting, not being able to keep the grift up any longer.
Do they have ShrewCoin? Is that them?
Yeah, that's them. But you know, and then who is and like Sean looking at Kingston. What? Yep, can't miss Sean Kingston as your main psychedelic asset. But no, seriously, and then looking at companies like Cybin or MindMed or Atai, you know, just like there's going to be attempts to sort of consolidate the things that are on the table. You know, I'm curious to see what'll happen with some of the clinic providers if you get larger companies that just try to snap things up in order to just expand their clinic, even if it's just in the realm of ketamine, playing for that sort of early mover advantage for if or when MDMA and psilocybin get approved. And I think Atai, just to bring it back to the sort of episode topic, like Atai just has the money and has the fundraisers. Like, it's not just about the money they've got in the bank, but when you look at people like Angermeyer, Thiel, and Novogratz, with not only with their own deep pockets, but with the connections that they have,
cachet that they have now too, you know,
the history, like being able to show up and say, like, you know, we bring whatever skills and panache to the forefront in our investment, there's a real opportunity here. I mean,
Totally.
of the three companies that listed on the NASDAQ, Compass and Atai, I mean, granted, it's still early days for Atai, but they've both gone up. MindMed, I don't think they've recovered from that initial uplisting.
I think actually that Atai dropped a little bit since their listing price slightly. I know MindMed dropped quite a bit. I think Compass is double their offering price. Yeah.
Well, I also wanted to talk a little bit about one of the most wackadoodle statements I've heard from Angermeyer, bringing it back to look at all these crazy things Angermeyer said, is this notion of refusing to think negative thoughts.
Oh God!
Do a whole episode on that.
Toxic positivity.
I don't even know where to begin. I was just doing some background research as I was reading that in the show notes, and I was thinking about the hedonistic imperative, which is another interesting and strange idea in the world of transhumanism. David Pierce is a prominent figure in that field, that he kind of rebranded his movement as Humanity Plus. But he talks about hedonistic transhumanism and hedonistic imperatives, where it's a moral imperative to abolish sad thoughts or bad things, however that's defined. He goes even further and talks about you have to design the global ecosystem to reduce animal suffering and whatnot, which, okay, but at the same time, refusing to think bad thoughts is such a myopic, blindered, and possibly delusional way of trying to solve this problem. If you don't have bad thoughts and you refuse to think bad thoughts, how can you meditate about PTSD or existentialism or literally all the bad thoughts that you talk about marketing psychedelics for,
Well, I can certainly see if your personal life philosophy is to not think negative thoughts. I can certainly see how you suddenly find yourself at a dinner table with Paul Kagame. It makes sense. It makes sense. If you get those blinders, that I can see how you write an article that says that he's actually the real life Black Panther. I can see that. I challenge other groups. I challenge other groups out there, the different more of the grassroots organizations, because I doubt some of the other publications will ever cover Atai Angermeyer's association with Kagame. But I do challenge the other groups that are out there, the various decrim groups that are out there. I challenge them to bring this up, spread it around. I mean, because this is where we're at right now. We're so far away from psychedelics. It's amazing. Right. None of the companies have mushrooms. It's how silly would the cannabis space look if it was all synthetic cannabis and pills for this and that. It's it would look ridiculous. The space looks ridiculous to me right now, when a mushroom is the furthest thing away from what we can possibly think about right now.
Right.
That's where we're at.
Strange times.
Long sigh.